Hey guys, Omni here. So Thursday night, I finally saw Candyman 2021, and it's taken me till now to kind of gather my thoughts on the film. I even revisited the original so that I could try to refresh myself on it. I grew up around the time the film was kind of in the rise up, and I've seen it plenty of times when I was a kid, but I don't think I've seen it maybe in the last 15 years. But I still thought I remembered it pretty well. But there's some things in the movie that I was just like kind of questioning whether or not it was the movie or my memory that was kind of missing some pieces in the puzzle. So I even rewatched the original film last night. I have watched plenty of explained videos, and nothing has really kind of filled in a lot of the gaps that I've had. So obviously I think it's the movie. So that said, I did like the movie. I did enjoy it. I did think it was beautifully directed. It's a beautiful film to look at. You know, even for as grotesque as some of the things get, it's a very beautifully shot film. Like both Chicago and the presence in this film, the setting is at the same time gorgeous, inviting, but also eerily haunting in a way. Like you can definitely feel like something is breathing in the world around you throughout the entire film. And I think that goes to show how just creative and interesting Nia DaCosta's style is that she brings to the table in this. She's obviously the director in this. She's going to be directing the upcoming The Marvels. But I think she does a fantastic job in this at creating atmosphere. And she treats every frame like it is a piece of art. Like there's always some stellar attention to detail to everything that is happening in the frame. And there's some really creative sequences that are presented in this that utilize, obviously, the core theme. One of the core pieces to the mythos of the Candyman is mirrors, reflections. And she does some really creative things in here. And a lot of the horror elements of this, a lot of the tense suspense comes in through the utilization of these reflections and mirrors, the framings of mirrors in the scenes and how they're utilized. It's really creative. While we don't always see every kill, there's always a really interesting way that we have a lead into it and a way that it's displayed or represented that I think she does a really good job with, and it's really effective. She also gets some amazing performances out of two amazing actors. Teyonah Parris, who plays the girlfriend of the lead character, played by Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, who, if you guys here on the channel might remember from Aquaman, who's Black Manta. He does a fantastic job in this. Both of them do fantastic performances in this. I think they are great leads. They feel like a natural couple. There's one other interesting character in here brought to life by Colman Domingo. He is a character that has been around this community for quite some time. He works the local laundromat, and he's also kind of feeds in a lot of the more finer details of the Candyman mythos to Yahya as he's doing his research on the character. The supporting cast in this is kind of like just a mix and match of a bunch of different stereotypes and caricatures and tropes that we've seen in horror movies quite often, most of which you're just like waiting for these people to die. Like there's no dimensions to them whatsoever. Yahya's character, Anthony, is an artist who's kind of going through a dry spell. He's not really had anything really drive his motivation to create anything in quite some time. And he catches wind of this story from the past of this character called the Candyman, this legend of the Candyman and Cabrini Green that he just starts to fall in love with and obsess over. And there's this nice play in how stories change over time, because while the original film did happen, there are some interesting ways where we hear it from different people's perspective where things played out quite differently. So it's a bit of a game of telephone. So we see how the original film has evolved over time and how people remember Helen, Candyman, Anne-Marie, and that whole situation with the child completely differently. And it makes you question what is necessarily the truth of the matter until the truth is revealed. As he starts to dive more and more into this background, this lore, he uncovers a lot of the themes that we saw in the original film as well. Gentrification, obviously, surrounding Cabrini Green, racial injustice and inequality, a lot of themes that are still extremely important to this day. However, once that kind of comes into focus in the story, I feel like that is what it more becomes about in the end. And there's some changes to the character of Candyman that contradict the original film and who and what Candyman is. there's some things in here that don't necessarily add up. This movie, unlike the original, which I think it spent a little too much time talking about the effects and not showing the effects because of the nature of the characters we're following in this, we don't really get to see a lot of what was talked about aside from some flashbacks. And there's some really creative way that the movie handles flashbacks. Anytime there's a exposition or a flashback presented, it's all done through this shadow puppetry that is really eerie and beautiful to look at, and honestly really interesting. I did really appreciate that as well. Where the first film, you got to live with the neighborhood. You got to see Helen go into the neighborhood, go into Cabrini Green while people were still living there. There was an active feeling of community to the point where the community was actually a character, how the community was observed, how they were viewed, how they were treated, how they lived, how they treated the outside world. We didn't see really any of that in here, and I think that's one of the things that it was kind of lacking. And this is something you see a lot with a lot of films today, where it feels like we're going to talk about the important things, but we won't really do anything more than that. There's nothing left up to interpretation save for the revelation about Candyman that comes towards the end of the film, which still, to this day, I can't make heads or tails of. It still doesn't make any sense to me. The movie presents contradictory information throughout, and it makes it hard to really gravitate and understand what the hell is going on and who's even telling the truth at the end of this, which might be part of the point, but as the viewer, for me, it just takes me out of it because we know firsthand what the truth is from the first movie. It's not like that is left up to interpretation. We saw Candyman. We heard from Candyman directly. So like we have firsthand information as the viewer as to what's going on. This film doesn't really have any of that. The story itself, for being only an hour and 30 minutes, 10 minutes shorter than the original film, it still feels rushed. I feel like there's a lot of stuff missing in this. There's a couple of sequences where we just kind of veer off to follow characters that have nothing to do with the story. There's next to no logical consequences for a lot of these killings that seem to be happening in and around Anthony. There's a lot of just gaps in logic in our main characters, in the story itself, that just don't quite add up unless you remove the original movie from your mind. But the film goes out of its way to make that movie part of the canon. This felt like what's one of those movies where they had like a good idea, but the studio didn't want to produce it, or they didn't think it would be good, so they needed to attach it to an IP. So they went with the Candyman because that would line up with the kind of the themes and the message of the film that they wanted to tell. However, those themes were all that they had to say in the film, and it didn't really show through the story. And like I said, all these themes are still extremely important to this day, and they're still important to me as well. I've talked about them here on this channel, despite how a lot of the time I try to keep the real world out of a lot of these conversations, but sometimes you just can't avoid it, and I don't care because they need to be talked about even to this day, which is just sad. But the problem is, it doesn't really do anything with it. The movie itself doesn't do anything more than just talk about it. And that's what takes the forefront of the film over the Candyman stuff itself. The Candyman, if you're going in this for, I'll say one thing though, it might be a spoiler. If you're going in this for Tony Todd, he might be on the board, but there's not a lot of Tony Todd. There's not a lot of Candyman in this movie in general. Unlike the original film, Candyman, he's more of a looming presence in this movie. In the original, he was a character. He had lines, he had dialogue, he had appearances, he had charisma, he had a lot of these really iconic moments with the lead character. None of that in this. This is literally just following our leads and this story and this ever-growing build-up to this end that almost kind of feels like it came out of nowhere. It contradicts the original film. It contradicts itself. It seems unfocused on what it actually wants to talk about and present as part of the story. But it's beautiful, well shot. The cinematography is beautiful. The music is beautiful. The performances are great. There's some weird comedy in here that I don't feel quite works and kind of takes you out of it every once in a while. But there's some pretty creative kills in here as well as shots of kills that I had not seen before that were really, really well done and unsettling. If I were to give this a rating, I'd probably give it like a 7.9 out of 10 or maybe like a B minus. I think it's got some strong direction. I think it's got some great cinematography. I think it's got some really cool imagery and artistic vision in there, some great acting. It's just the inconsistencies in the story, some issues with the pacing, some deviations from the plot, and just some internal logic that doesn't always make sense, just kind of bring those points down a little bit. I'd probably wait and catch it when it's on matinee or on streaming. Guys, if you've seen it, what did you think of it? What did you think of the original? Sound off the comments. Let me know your thoughts down below. We'll carry on the conversation after the video. Huge shout out to our channel legends, Mandy Sherritt, Ryan Karen, Jason Coleman, and Philly Vane, and Yuri Korskov. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you want to talk about the movie, any other movies, anything at all, come hang out on our Discord or follow me on all my socials, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care, everybody.